Hello and welcome to Curtis Stage Tutorials. Today's tutorial is on Photoshop, and we're going to do a texture text effect. Maybe put some images in the background, and I've got a couple examples of what we could do with this. There's one, and there's a possibility. You can see that there's texture in the background of that text plus a little cityscape. And here's another one that's a little more clean and refined. So we're going to open up a Photoshop document. With the Photoshop document, I want to have this document's 1,000 pixels by 800. It can be whatever size you want, but I'm just making this kind of just so you know the size that I have here. And I'm going to pick a font that's fairly thick here. So this font is because I want to have the texture show up inside. If you pick a thin font, this won't work very well. Okay, one other thing that I want to do is if I double click, I can see my options bar up here for this text. But there's another panel that I want to talk about really quickly, and that's the character panel. So if I go to Window, Character, I can bring up this character panel, and you can see that I could size the font here. Now for this demo, we want this to be fairly big. I can size the font here. But notice right over here, I've got these two A's right here. This is the leading, and this will allow me to adjust the second line of text up or down. If I go to the left, it goes up, and if I go to the right, it goes down. So you can see that I can adjust this text on the second line only with the leading. And then I've got the kerning. I could do in between each letter, or I could create a space in between the letters, right? Or I could do a space, if I highlight that line, I could do a space and adjust the kerning of all the letters on that line evenly. So this is pretty handy to do. And then I can also adjust the size. I don't do this very often, but I can adjust the height and the width of my text right here. So that's pretty nice. All right, and if I hit my check bar, that'll apply any of that stuff. So that's the character panel just kind of briefly. I can also change the font in that one as well. All right, let's start talking about adding our lighting and texture, and I'm going to do that with the Layers Style panel, and that's a blending mode. I'm going to go down here to the bottom of my Layers panel. This little FX down here will let me go to my blending options for Layers Style. This dialog box comes up. The first thing I'm going to want to put on here is I'm going to put on a bevel and emboss. So I'm going to go highlight this bevel and emboss. I'm going to go to the style and pick pillow emboss. I'm going to do a size of 2, and I'm going to leave everything else on this the same here. Maybe I could fool around with a few of these. You can see that if I raise the depth up, you'll see how kind of that gets a little bit more deep. So you can mess around with these things later. We can add or subtract stuff. In fact, let's move the depth up to 111 on here, just to give it a little bit more depth. Now I'm going to change my angle here. This is the angle of the lighting. I'm going to do 40 for the angle, and I could use this little circle here to move it around as well. But I'm going to do 40 on this, 40 degrees, and I'm going to do 42 on the altitude. So that's for the shading and the angle of the shading. If I go higher than this, if I go to, let's say, 100 degrees, you're not going to see that much of a difference because the size of this bevel is too small. All right, so there we go. If I make my size bigger, you can see how pillowy it gets. We don't want to do that yet, but it does look kind of cool. Don't be distracted by that. All right, so I'm going to go back down to a size on here of 2. So there we go. All right, before I leave this layer style for this layer, I want to now add on a gradient overlay. So I'm going to click down here, and as soon as I put this on here, ooh, that looks pretty cool, right? But I'm going to change this gradient overlay just a tad. And again, this is completely random of how you change this, but I'm going to change the angle of this to 145. You'll see that it gets lighter on one side and darker on another. And I can also change it, here's 90. So it's kind of however you want the angle to be. Now I'm picking the opposite way. The bevel and emboss we did 40. So this angle of 140, the light's coming the opposite way. So that's kind of the reasoning behind this. I can also adjust the scale of this. So you can see that the scale can go up or down. If I take it down, then it's a real harsh gradient. And if I take it up higher, then it's a little softer. So I'm going to take this scale up to 150 just to make this a little bit, because my text over here will be too dark if I leave that scale at 100. So that's making that scale get bigger. Now I can adjust this texture here if I want to. And if I click on the gradient window, watch how I did that. I clicked right on the color there. If I click that, then I can go in and apply any gradient. I'm going to stay with the black and white and gray. But just to show you how to adjust these, I can click on one of these stops. These little buttons down here are stops, and I can click on one of those, and then I could double click it. It'll bring up a color panel, or I could click color down here, and it'll also bring up my color panel. And then I could make one of these stops, you know, darker gray, lighter gray, black. I could go towards red. You can see how you can really kind of adjust this. But we're going to stay with the black on this, on that side. And I'm going to maybe go with a gray, you know, have a stop over here and pick a gray over here. So it didn't change it too much. And then I'm going to click over here and put another stop and make this one white. So now, and I can adjust these. Watch when I slide these around, how it changes my coffee cup text a little bit when I slide these around here. So I'm trying to make it have a feel that the light is coming from a certain angle with this. So something like that. Again, this is completely up to you. If I don't like these stops, I can just click and drag and delete them like that. Okay, so I'm going to click OK. It'll be fine like that. Again, these are completely random, just to kind of going on looks. So I'm going to click OK to this layer style, and that's done for that. Now we're going to make a copy of this coffee cup layer. So Command J on your keyboard if you're on a Mac, Control J if you're on a PC. I could also drag the layer down to the Add New Layer button on Photoshop, and that would give me a copy as well. So now I've got a copy here. I'm going to open up its layer effects. Now I'm going to keep the bevel and emboss on here, and I'm going to subtract the gradient overlay, and we're going to add a couple. I'm going to add an inner shadow first. So let's go to inner shadow, and on the inner shadow, I want the let's see. On the inner shadow, I want the blend mode to stay multiply, but the opacity I'm going to move up to 100. Okay, you can see if I uncheck and check the inner shadow going on and off. I'm going to switch the angle of this inner shadow to match the angle of the light that I just created. So kind of maybe it was 140 below, 140 before, so something like that, maybe 120, somewhere in this area, 130. Again, it's kind of up to you where you put that. Okay, and then I'm going to, if I adjust the distance and size, you'll see you can create a huge distance here. That's too much inner shadow. So I'm going to have this distance, maybe I'll leave it at 5. And here's my size of the inner shadow. It gets softer as I go more to the right of the inner shadow. And the choke, I'll just show you what that is. This hardens the shadow. So you can see that it's a real hard edge when I adjust the choke up. And that could be a cool effect on here to make this text look like it's really cut out of the space. So we can go back and adjust that later if you like that choke. But if I take this all the way down, it's a softer shadow. So I'm going to leave that choke at 0, and I'll make the size, I'll have the size actually go to 0 as well on this. And everything else will be the same on that. Now we're going to add a stroke. So let's go down to the bottom of the layers, this layer style, and add a stroke on here. And I'm going to change this. We'll leave the size of the stroke at 3. That's fine. I'm going to change this from a color to a gradient. So we're going to have a gradient stroke on here. And that stroke color, that angle is the only thing. We're going to leave that gradient. That'll be fine. And we're going to change the angle to 90. So it gives a really cool effect right now. That beveled edge now with the stroke on it really looks like it's coming out. You can see I've got a problem here that I have too much. My P's are coming. My P and my C are coming up into my top. I'm gonna have to pull that down because it's a little troublesome, but we'll leave it for now. Okay, I'm gonna click OK to this. This looks good. So inner shadow, I'm not gonna mess with the bevel and emboss. I'm just gonna keep that right where it is, and I'm gonna click OK. Now, the one thing we're going to do on this is for this layer right here, I'm going to take out the fill of the layer, the color fill. So watch what I do. I'm going to pull that all the way down to 0, and because it was white, by the way. It was with these two layers over the top of each other, this fill became white, especially since I took the gradient overlay off, right? So that gradient overlay, see the eyeballs off on the gradient overlay layer. So I'm going to take this fill all the way down to white, bringing back that cool gradient I had from the lower layer. Now these two things are working together here. So these two layers are working together. So now I've got this top one is only the outer edge, and the bottom one is the bevel as well, but it also has the gradient overlay on it. So that's what we've got going here on this on the layers panel. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to make a new layer, and this layer is not going to be a text layer. We're going to click and create a new layer. This layer I'm going to name it, I'm going to just click where it says layer 1 and rename it to maybe gold or yellow, whatever. And I'm going to select this text to create, you'll see what I'm going to do here. Watch this. I'm going to do Command and click on the T, or Control click if you're on a PC, Command click if you're on a Mac. And you'll see that it gives me the marching ants as a selection tool around this text. Awesome. The only problem is when I zoom in, you'll see that because I have that stroke on here and the bevel and emboss, that my stroke being 3 pixels, look at how my marching ants are not getting the full edge here. So I'm going to have to expand this to match this stroke from the layer style. So to do that, I'm going to go to Select, Modify, Expand. I'm going to pick 3 pixels. That was the amount of pixels that I added in the stroke. So I'm going to click OK. And now you can see that the marching ants go right around to the stroke now. Really, really great. So now I'm going to Command minus and zoom out of that. Okay, now I have good marching ants. Now I want to change to the gold layer here so that what I do next happens on the gold layer. That's looking cool right now. We could actually stop here probably, but we're going to add a few more tricks into this. So I'm going to drop a color in here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my paint bucket tool, and I'm going to click the foreground color on the toolbar and kind of maybe select a yellow from in here, kind of a bright yellow. Maybe a gold and more in the orange tones right there, and click OK. I'm going to drop that right inside there. Okay, so now what happens is this yellow's in here, and that's fine. We're going to see the other stuff in a second. What we want to do now is we want to switch the blend mode of this so that it can composites with the text below it. So the blend mode's right up here where it says normal, and I'm going to switch this blend mode to soft light. This will let light through, and now we're going to see through to the layer below, which was that gradient layer, and to our layer that has just the outline on it. I'm going to go back and make sure that I'm off my paint bucket here and go to my black arrow tool. Okay, so I changed that to soft light, and I can also adjust the opacity on it as well. So you can see that if you take the opacity down, it gets on the layer up here. You can see where I'm pulling the opacity to the left, and it'll bring it all the way down to 0. We'll bring that. Well, I won't see any gold. So if I bring it all the way up, I'm going to see the yellowy gold. So I'm going to somewhere in the middle there, something like that. Pretty cool. So it's starting to look kind of metallic here at this point. I don't know if that goes well with coffee, but we'll see. So the next thing I want to do is I want to make a new layer again. Same thing. I'm going to click down here, create a new layer. And this layer is going to be more of a brown layer, and we're going to have a texture on it. So I'm going to call this texture layer. So I'm going to click here on the word layer, on the layer here, and click texture. Type that in. And what we're going to do is we're going to fill this with a color. So again, I'm going to go back to my paint bucket tool. This time I'm going to fill with maybe a brown. So I'm going to go down in here, make this more orange. So I'm going to fill this with like a brown tone and click OK, and then drop that in there. Now, I need this color in here to do what I'm going to do next, and I'm going to create noise in this to get this texture going. So I'm going to go to Filter, up top, Noise, Add Noise, and on this I want the amount of noise to be around 80, I would say. If you get too high, then it takes out all the color, and if you get too low, then you have no noise. So I'm going to do about 80. Gaussian, and monochromatic. If I don't pick monochromatic, it becomes all color. So that's cool, but that's not what we want. Okay, so I want it to retain some of that brown. Okay, pretty cool so far. So now I want to make this have kind of metallic lines to it. So I'm going to go to Filter, Blur. I'm going to do a motion blur on this. This way I can kind of adjust what, kind of make little lines here. If I take the distance all the way up, you can see that gets really kind of this metallic-y looking feel to it. So if I take that distance, it's just slight lines going across. So this is completely up to you in here on how you want to do this. But I'm going to go maybe a distance of 64, and I'm going to do the opposite angle of the way the light has been hitting. We've been doing the light at an angle of kind of 40. I'm going to do this texture going the other way. So maybe, so we've been doing negative 40 on the angle here. So I'm going to go 45 going the other way. So we have the opposite of the lighting technique. I'm going to click OK. Okay, obviously this needs to be a blend mode on here. And I'm also could sharpen this a little bit if I want to. I've done that a few times, so I'll go to Filter. I'll just show it to you. We may not like it, so we can undo it if we don't want it. But Unsharp Mask, and we can sharpen this. If you take the threshold up on here, you can see how the lines will sharpen a little bit, and they'll get a little, if I turn preview on, they'll just get a little sharper on there, right? So they'll stand out a little bit more. And if you don't like it, you can always just cancel. So either way. All right. So now what we're going to do is we want to take this layer, and we obviously need to do a blend mode on this so that it's, it's going to have an, see through to the bottom down in here. So maybe like overlay. And now we can see through to the background on there. That's pretty cool. So we can stop here if we want. Again, it's starting to look pretty nice now. It's starting to look like kind of a real Lego. Command D gets rid of the marching ants, and that's pretty sweet. There's a couple other things we could do in here. We could put images inside this text, and I want to show you that so you kind of understand how that works. I'm going to open up an image and make a mask out of this and put the image inside that. I'm going to actually bring back my marching ants. How would I do that? I would click on the text right here. I'd probably pick the yellow one because this one has a blur on it. So I'm going to click on the yellow text here, Command click, and get my marching ants back. And it'll actually pick the outside now. I don't need to open it. I don't need to go expand it. It's going to pick the whole outside of this. So now what I want to do is I want to go create a new layer, but I'm going to bring a picture in and put this and use this as a mask. So let me go open up and find a photo on my hard drive and bring it in. And you can take any image off the internet. So let me go find one here real quick. And you could take any image off the internet and bring it in if you like. But I'm going to pick this cityscape here. So I'm going to open this up with Photoshop. So I'm going to have this open here. So I like this little city here. I'm going to take this with my black arrow tool and I'm going to drag it to the document I'm working on. Sometimes it's good to go in the 2-up window panel to see both panels. I'm going to take this, I'm going to drag it with my black arrow tool on here. And I'm going to make sure that it's on the topmost layer here. So there it is. You can see, let me close that. You can see that when I bring it in here, I can move this around, but I want to make sure that the marching ants don't move with it, right? Because that wouldn't help me. So I may want to deselect the marching ants and get this picture on here. And my picture is not big enough, so I'm going to have to transform it, Command T. And I'm just going to scale it from side to side. If I don't want it to distort, I want to hold Shift down so that it constrains its proportions here. So I hold Shift as I'm grabbing a corner to scale it up or down so it keeps the aspect ratio the same. Then I hit the check mark. Okay, so now I have this layer here above these layers. I'm going to go back and get those marching ants again. Command click, and there they are. And now I want to go up to my cityscape layer and create a mask. So the mask will be created out of the marching ants that I have here. So the mask button is right down here on the bottom of the layers panel. If I click that, it's going to add a mask. Pretty awesome. Black hides, white reveals. So the black will knock out everything on the background, and the white will show whatever's to the left. And now I want to take this and I'm going to click on the city picture right here. Here's the mask, here's the city, and I'm going to create, maybe say multiply, and now I'll be able to see all the stuff that I had done prior. Multiply is a blend mode. I could even try overlay, and that'll be a little brighter. Now what if I want to move this city around in the picture? Do you see this little chain link right here? I have to uncheck that and click on my city picture, and then I can move the city around within this. You'll see it moving both on my screen and over here in the layers palette. If I move it too high, obviously I'll see the bottom edge. If I move it too low, I'll see the top edge. So it's a way for you to kind of move the image around. And maybe I want to transform it again and make it bigger. I'm just going to expand it so we see some city here. Something like that. Kind of cool. All right, so there's a lot of possibilities with this tutorial that you can go in and change things around. It's fun to go mess with the settings and the layer effects that we have down in our text layers. So you can always go back in here and change your bevel and emboss. You can, of course, make the bevel bigger if you want to. Obviously it doesn't look so hot on here, but you can make it look a little bit bigger. You can go and change all kinds of things on this. You can go to your inner shadow like we said. We can make the size of the inner shadow bigger. So if I do the size bigger and then choke that off a little bit, it's going to give it kind of a more indented feel in it. So I kind of like that. Pretty nice for that. All right, so that has been a Curtis Stage tutorial that was on Photoshop on text effects.